Hi guys, welcome back to the studio and video 5 of my online tailoring course. If you followed me so far, great. You should have ended up with a complete block for your jacket and obviously the panels that we've looked at and drafted vents for, etc. in the last couple of videos. This video is all about the two-piece sleeve. People think that a two-piece sleeve is really complicated, it looks complicated, there's lots of strange measurements, etc. But actually it's not that difficult. Most of the measurements are taken from the original block that we drafted a couple of videos back. You do also need to know your sleeve length, or the sleeve length of the person you're making the jacket for. And just make sure you take it from the top of the shoulder, the little knobbly bit, down to the elbow and down to the wrist. Make sure when you measure you've got a bent arm, not a straight arm. So measure down and around to your cuff, to the wrist. The other measurement you'll need is the circumference of the cuff. Now obviously you can measure your wrist, but that's going to be a lot smaller than your cuff. So allow enough measurement so you've got a nice fitting, comfortable cuff. You'll end up with buttons for the opening cuff, so you've got to allow just a little bit more movement. So make it a tiny bit bigger than you think you're going to need. So we're going to go and look at the measurements we need from our original block. You've got your sleeve length, you've got your cuff diameter, and we will draft the two-piece sleeve. Okay, so this is our master block that we drafted. We need to take some measurements around the armhole, ready to draft the two-piece sleeve. First one, we're going to go from S1 to our back point notch, so BP, which is just below A1, and just measure straight up, and that is 4 3/4 inches, 12 centimeters. We'll call that measurement 1. Next we're going to go from D2 to E1, so D2 down to E1, and this time we need to hold our tape measure on its side and curve it around carefully to measure the curve. That one for me will be 7 inches, 17.5 centimeters, and we'll call that measurement 2. We're now going to go from E3 all the way around to I. And again, it's a curve. Hold your tape measure, measure around nice and accurately. I'm doing it just to show you. We're going to call this measurement 3, and that's 15 inches or 38 centimeters. Now we're going to go from I to F. So from I to F, again in a curve. Hold your tape, measure it round, following the shape of the curve. That's 8 1/4 inches or 21 centimeters, and we'll call that measurement 4. We're now going to go from D2 to our back point, or back notch. Again on a curve, hold your tape measure, follow the curve round, 4 1/4 inches or 10.5 centimeters. We're going to call this measurement number 5. We're now going to measure from S5 back to our under point, so the center point of our sleeve, and this time we can measure it flat, just like that, which is 2 3/4 inches or 7 centimeters. We'll call this measurement number 6. Next we're going to go from our under point round to E3, again with a curve, do it properly, take your time and measure it round. That's 3 5/8 of an inch or 9 centimeters. We're going to call this measurement number 7. Finally, we're going to measure from our back point. We're going to measure down to E1. Again, it's a curve. Don't think you can measure it flat. It's a very slight curve. Measure it round, and that's going to be 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimeters, and we'll call that measurement number 8. So that's all the measurements we need to do. Okay guys, so I've got a nice piece of pattern paper laid out. It's just about less than a metre, and obviously the normal width of my pattern paper, which is 75 centimetres. To draft the two-piece sleeve, we're going to start on the right-hand side of our paper. Make sure you've got plenty of space, and we're going to draw a vertical line down the right-hand side. And I'm going to come down from the top edge of the paper about 12 inches or 30 centimetres-ish. I'm just going to make a mark. We'll label this point O. This is our origin, as we did with our main block that we drafted. And I'm going to square across from this point. Again, I'm using my longer ruler just to make sure. So this will be the start of our sleeve block. From O, we're going to measure up, and we're going to go 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch. Make a mark, and we'll label this F. This is going to be our front notch point on our sleeve. We're now going to measure from O, and we're going to measure up the distance of measurement number 1 that we took off of our main block. So for me, that's 4 3/4 inches or 12 centimetres. Obviously your measurements might vary slightly. I'm going to label this point A, and again square across. We're now going to measure from our origin, O again. We're going to measure up, and this is measurement number 2 added to measurement number 3 from our original block, and divide that all by 3. So get your calculator out. So it's measurement 2 plus 3 divided by 3. For me, that is 7 1/4 inches or 18.5 centimetres. So we'll label this point E, and once again square across. Our next measurement is going to be a straight line from F up to this top line, our B line. And the length of that line is going to be measurement number 4 from our original block plus 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch. This will allow enough volume on our sleeve cap. If you wanted more volume, then add a little bit more. So instead of adding 2 centimetres, perhaps add 3 centimetres, and it will give you a more defined shape on the sleeve cap. But 2 is about right for me. So that's going to be 9 inches or 23 centimetres. Take a ruler, straight line from F to our top point. Like so. We'll label this point C. I'm now going to draw from C down to our A line. I'm going to draw back across. This measurement is going to be measurement number 5 we took from our block plus 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So that's 11.5 centimetres or 4.5 inches. And again, get your ruler and make sure that the length in a straight line from this point to this line is what you measured. And we can label this point D. We'll now measure from O across 2 centimetres, 3/4 of an inch. We'll label this point E. And this time we'll square down. Like so. We're going to split the difference between C and D, so halfway along this, and we're going to square up, and that's squaring off of this line, so not vertical or horizontal, but squaring off at this 90 degrees. So the half measurement from there, it was 4.5 inches or 11.5, so 2.25 inches. Label this point G. I'm going to square off of this outwards. .3 centimetres or half an inch, like so, and label this G1. I'm now going to square out from this line C to F, and it's going to be the distance C to F divided by 3. So that was 9 inches or 23 centimetres, so that's going to be 3 inches or 7 and a bit centimetres. So this is from C. Mark this point H. And we're going to square off of this line, 2.3 centimetres. Or 7/8 of an inch. Now I'm going to draw in our curve for our sleeve head. The curve will go from D, pass through G1, pass through C, let's label this H1, sorry, H1 this point, down to F, and then the opposite way to E. So get your French curve. So from D through G1 to C. C is the top of our sleeve, so we can make a little mark. That's where we're going to, the top of the sleeve will meet our shoulder seam. We're now going to go down to H, from C, H1 to F. And then we're going to do a curve from F to E. So that's our sleeve head curve constructed. Now I'm going to measure from B down this first line that we drew, and that's going to be our sleeve length. So for me, 25 inches or 63.5 centimetres. Like so. We can label this I. We're going to square across to meet this line that we drew down from E. Label this point J. From I, I'm going to measure down 3.5 centimetres or 1 3/8 of an inch. Label this K. We'll square across. We're now going to measure from K across, which is half our cuff circumference, plus 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch. Make a mark. We'll label this L. We can now join L to I to J with a very shallow upward curve, so not a straight line, because obviously the bottom of a cuff needs to have a slight curve on it, so it looks straight when it's being worn. So it's a very gentle curve. Like so. Now I'm going to join D to L, just with a straight line. Now measure from F to I. Like so, which is 46.5 centimeters or 18.5 inches, and we're going to come exactly halfway between the two. So let's just double check. F to I, oh no, 47 centimeters, sorry. So that's going to be 23.5 centimeters. I'm going to make a mark on this, the original line we drew. Label this point M. We can square off of this line. This is giving us the approximate location of our elbow. Obviously we're all slightly different, and I'll show you how you can adjust for slight differences in your arm lengths. So I'm just going to write on there elbow, just so we know that's what it is. I'm going to join E to J with a slight inward curve, and we're coming in at the elbow line approximately a centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. So if we mark that, you don't have to label it, just put a mark there. And for this, a hip curve is good. It's quite a shallow curve. So it's literally E, M, or the mark past M. So, where we drew this line D to L, where it crosses our elbow line, we can mark this point N. And we're going to measure along our elbow line, so back from N. We're going to measure 3 centimeters, 1.25 inches. Now we can't label it O because we've already used O, so we'll label this P. And we're going to join D through P to L with a curve. Again, hip curve is probably your best bet for this shape. If you've never done this before, like I say, do it with pencil and go over it several times until you're comfortable with the shape of your curve. So D down to P and P to L. We've now drawn the black lines around. This is our upper sleeve part, so the biggest part of our two-piece sleeve. We can now draw in the undersleeve, and we're going to draw it on top of our upper sleeve. Again, we're going to have to trace these off afterwards. First up, we're going to go from O, and we're going to come back, and we're going to measure 2 centimeters, 3/4 of an inch. And we can label this point Q. And we're going to just square up 1/2 centimetre or 1/4 of an inch. We'll call this Q1. And I'm going to measure along this curved line from I. We're going to come back another 2 centimetres, 3/4 of an inch. Label this point R. I'm going to draw a straight line from Q1 to R. Like so. Now I'm going to measure from O back, and that's going to be measurement number 6 that we took from our original block, plus 3 millimeters, or 1/8 of an inch. So for me, 2.5 inches or 7.3 centimeters. Label this point S. I'm going to square down from S 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 of an inch. So label this S1. Now I'm going to draw from S1, and we're going to draw a straight line up to our A line. The length of this straight line going up is going to be measurement number 7 plus 8. So add 7 and 8 together from our original block, and add 1/2 centimetre or 1/4 of an inch. So for me, that's going to be 6.5 inches or 16 centimetres. And as we did before, take your ruler and move it around from the point so you know you've got the right length. We can label this point T. We'll now make a mark halfway between S1 and T. So we know it's 16 centimetres. So that's 8 centimetres. 3.25 inches. I'm going to square off of that backwards. We can mark this point U. I'm going to measure along the line we've just drawn 1.75, 1.8 centimetres, 3/4, 1.8, so yeah, 3/4 of an inch. Label this U1. From T, we're going to square up 1 centimetre. 3/8 of an inch. You can label it T1 if you really want to, but it's not that important. From T, I'm going to measure across 1.5 centimetres or 5/8 of an inch. Label this V. And we're going to square up by 1/2 centimetre, 1/4 of an inch. And we can join T1 to this mark we just made. You could call it V1 if you really wanted to. so. So we've got a slight upward slant. I'm now going to draw the curve in for the undersleeve, which will go from T1 through U1 through S1, so just below the first line we drew across, and back up to Q1, like so. And again, take your time, do it in pencil to do it properly. So T1 down to U1, and then from U1, S1, Q1. Spend your time to get it right. So I go from Q1 to S1. So finish the curve off. So this will be the curve for our undersleeve. Now draw a line from V straight down to L. The line we've just drawn, where it meets the elbow line, we can label this W. Now measure from W across to P, which is 5.5 centimetres, 2.25 inches, and we're going to make a mark halfway between the two. We'll label this point X. Now draw a curve from V, put the little mark above, through X, down to L. And the hip curve is good for this, as it's a shallower curve. So I'm going to go from L to X. And then from X to V. Like so. So this is the back seam of our undersleeve. See, this is the back seam of our upper sleeve. Finally, to finish off the undersleeve, we're going to go from Q1 down to R. But we're going to come in at the elbow line by about 1 centimetre. Don't need to label it, just make a mark. Again, hip curve for this, if you've got one. If not, take your time. So okay, there we go. So we've got our 2 panels for our 2-piece sleeve. The undersleeve is in the middle of the outer sleeve. The only thing we don't have yet is we haven't added our hem allowance. There's a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance allowed around the rest of the pattern pieces. I generally add 1.5 inches-ish, 4 centimetres, something like that. Bearing in mind this is a curve, we want to keep that curve. Measure down 4 centimetres along this curve, like so. Now this is a curve coming out this way. We need to extend the curve following the shape of the sleeve. So don't just come straight down, as it won't work very well. Like so. So that's for the upper sleeve, inner sleeve or under sleeve. And as before, you can have pattern pieces crossing over at certain points, but we're going to trace them off to carry on. Two more things to do. Marking our grain line. So go from our original line, the very first line we drew, and make an arbitrary measurement so it lies slap bang in the middle-ish. So I'm going 5 inches, 13 centimetres, like so. Draw a line in. Make sure you go through both pattern pieces. Arrow top and bottom so you know you can mark it. GL grain line. Now I said if you wanted to adjust your sleeve because your arms don't fit to this exact dimension, i.e. where your elbow lies, the simplest way of doing it is to draw 2 horizontal lines. One sort of midway between S1 and the elbow line, across. Obviously I should be doing this properly, but I'm just going to show you what I mean. Draw a line across there, and likewise between elbow and our hem line, draw parallel to the elbow line, like so. If your elbow is lower than this point, then all you need to do is cut the pattern, which you've drafted them off into separate panels. Cut the piece there and extend the pattern so your elbow will fall slightly lower. And of course then adjust, cut by along this line and come back up the same amount because you still want your hem to finish at the right length. If, however, your elbow to wrist measurement is longer or shorter, then again, cut, spread, or shorten, and do the opposite here. So you just make sure that your elbow sits exactly where your actual elbow does. Okay, so we can finish this now by going off and tracing these 2 pattern pieces off independently. Make sure you add your front notch point, which was the first F that we put in there. If you want to put your back notch position in on your sleeve, S1 is your UP or under point. You can measure from your original block, from your under point, your UP, back to your back point. So that will be measurement 7 and 8 added together. So if you add those together, measure the curve around, and you can put your back notches or the back notch points in place. So from S1, which we'll now label UP, measure around, add 7 and 8 together from our original draft. Okay, go and transfer these onto separate pattern pieces, and then we can add in our vents on both pieces. Okay, here's my upper sleeve traced off. You can see the front notch, the center shoulder seam notch. This is the back edge, obviously being the front there, marked on my grain line. Now for a proper sleeve, you should have a working cuff, in other words an opening cuff. Although you'll probably never open it, it looks much better. If you didn't want an opening cuff, you can forget this bit of the video and you can just sew your sleeve together with a 1 centimetre 3-inch seam allowance, and then put some fake buttonholes and your buttons in place. But of course you're going to do it properly, yeah? First thing we're going to do is along the back edge, we're going to mark 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch, which is going to be our seam stitching line. We added to the pattern a 1.5 inch or 4 centimetre hem allowance, so we'll measure up that distance. One and a half inches, 4 centimetres, and just make a mark. From that point, I want to measure up 12 centimetres. Or 4 3/4 inches. This is where we're going to draw our vent extension. Along the bottom, just continue that hemline, and it can be straight, it doesn't have to be too curved. I'm going to measure from our stitching line 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimetres. So from the stitching line, and same at the top. Draw a straight line. From the mark that we made, which was 12 centimetres up from our hem line, square out ish. I know it's a slight curve, but just square across. And from this top mark, we're going to measure down our stitching line 1 inch, 2.5 centimetres, and make a mark, make a dot, as we're going to stitch down and finish at that dot. So that's our upper sleeve complete. We can move on to the undersleeve. So here's the undersleeve, exactly the same, traced off. We've got our underpoint, we've got our double back sleeve notch, so we know this is the back edge, grain line running through. We're going to do exactly the same as we did for the upper sleeve. First of all, continue our hemline. Measure up 1.5 inches, 4 centimeters, make a mark, and from that mark measure up 12 centimeters, 4.5 inches, make a mark, draw in our 1 centimeter seam allowance, 3/8 of an inch, like so. This time we're only going to measure 2 inches or 5 centimeters from our stitching line. We measured slightly larger for our upper sleeve because, of course, when that's folded under to form the facing, you're going to have buttonholes in, and what you don't want is your buttonholes running into your lining. So for this, 2 inches, 5 centimeters. Join the lines, all the marks together, and again square out from our top mark and from our top position of our vent, mark down 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters, and make a dot for where we're going to finish our stitching line. So that's it, well done. You've now constructed and drafted all the panel pieces that we need for our jacket. I know you might be thinking, well, hang on, there's loads of pieces missing. Yes, there are, but we will do all of those pieces on the fly. We'll do our collar, we'll do our facings for lapels, we'll do pocket flaps and so on as we need them. We've got the main parts that we need to begin cutting our fabric and getting everything ready. So go ahead, draft your 2-piece sleeve, and like I've said to you before in other videos, cut out some test fabric, put the panels together, put the sleeves in, set them in just roughly, and just check that everything fits. If not, you can adjust it as you need. So until the next video, which hopefully will be coming very soon, happy sewing, and I'll see you soon.